Hi, and welcome back to AppSecCon 2022. In this panel discussion, we're going to be talking about governance, risk, and compliance. We've got three great speakers. We've got Piyush Sharma, who is the head of enterprise security and technology operations at Zora. We've got Rohan Singla, who is the director of cybersecurity and privacy at ChargePoint, and Adam Kim, who's the vice president and chief information security officer at CyberCatch. Great conversation, great panel. You're really going to understand how we can build governance, risk, and compliance into our process. Let's check it out.
Hey, everyone. We're talking about GRC in software lifecycle development. Thanks, Andrew and Rohan. In my prior experience, I've seen GRC being very bureaucratic and process-heavy, a process and a function, especially when it's applied to software development lifecycle. As SDLC has shifted left into DevOps, compliance has been one of those key areas of focus which has tended to slow down the development lifecycle, be it in the CI/CD component, be it in the different gates that have to be put in place. Personally, I've seen challenges where compliance and continuous compliance automation has struggled to keep up with the different threat vectors and adding different frameworks within a agile SDLC lifecycle management solution. That said, Andrew, what do you think in that space? What are some of your pain points you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Piyush. I think, when we think of GRC and software development, I'm very much in the same vein as you characterized it. It almost seems like a bureaucracy. Let me tell you a case in point of what I mean. I was part of a large development group at a large property and casualty insurer. They're one of the biggest companies in the property and casualty insurance business. And I can tell you a lot of the software development issues when it came to risks or risks related to code. I'm talking about the R in GRC. Literally, these would be hundreds of items that would be pulled out of some sort of scan. Typically, it was a static type scan. And they were really just appended to an existing a GRC tool. The tools that sort of create a ticket. The ticket describes a software flaw. Is it cross-site scripting? Is it a SQL injection? Is it a cross-site forgery type of defect? And these were tickets that were in this system. And these would all be really high-risk issues that a developer somewhere in the organization had to read, had to understand, and ultimately have to fix. The real challenge and the real pain point that I experienced is that it took so long. The whole process from discovery of the issue to actually the developer looking at the ticket and ultimately saying, yes, I've got a problem. I've got to go out and fix this. Could be weeks that turn into maybe months. And by that time, who knows what's happened to the development pipeline and all the other different changes that occur. So that's been my pain point in a lot of these discussions. And, that's kind of, I believe, one of our shared anxiety. How do we help software development? How do we develop software faster and also be able to manage risk, the big R in GRC? So, Rohan, I'm curious from kind of your perspective, what you've experienced, what you're seeing out there, and some of the pain points that you've kind of experienced with GRC and software development.
Yeah, no, thanks, Andy, for that. Right, just to echo the points you and Piyush have mentioned, because obviously GRC historically has been seen from an organization perspective, and it was more a case in point for applications where one application had to comply to a particular certification like PCI or SOC 2 or SOX. Off late, for the past few years, with the agile environment, and you have a unified control framework. So how do you have the applications comply to your GRC framework from a risk, as you mentioned, from a compliance perspective? But one of the key challenges that I see, right, with the development teams is, with the agile teams, how do you provide them feedback continuously, right? You can't slow down the pace from a compliance team or a security team perspective, because they are on a sprint. They are on a dedicated timeline to ship the product out. So how do I provide them feedback continuously? I can't wait until the end of the product being shipped, right, to provide a GRC feedback. And the developers, to your point, they might have some interest in the technical side, but the compliance side, something they are not interested in, and they feel it is probably a waste of their time when you talk to the engineers. uh, SQL injection will still pique their interest, but if I go to them, I have a unified control framework, I want you to comply to this and this control, they're like, yeah, Rohan, go away, this is not something of interest to me, right? And which is where I have to provide feedback on a continuous basis. The speed of us talking to them has to be agile as well, and it has to be pointed, right. It cannot go into loops where we continuously look at different controls. We, as a security and compliance team, need to know what is the boundary, right? Where do you stop, or where do you draw a line? What is the absolute no-go area, and where are some areas where we can compromise on from a compliance perspective? And it has to be a mutual ground where we agree to eventually, right? Because the main business goal is to get the product or the software out. And touching on this, right, some of the core elements of GRC are more around your change management, config management, and then asset management is a big piece, right? Around asset management from a software perspective, one of the key challenges, again, with SBOM coming in, understanding your open source libraries or your products open source code that you're using, right? Do we have a good handle on it? And you have engineers, probably making use of a third party software or a third party library, which in turn is making use of a different fourth party or fifth party software, right? Which we aren't aware of from a compliance perspective. And with SBOM coming into play, how does your product comply to different regulations, right? Be it SBOM or be it the other regulations that we as an organization have to comply with, right? Now that becomes a key aspect in asset management, right? Knowing what code is being used, what libraries are being used, and from a supply chain perspective, what is being used. For us, or for me especially, right? I also look at hardware products. The industry on the hardware side from a compliance perspective is not very well defined around regulations and compliance. One of the constant feedback I get is, on the hardware side, the industry is not well defined. You don't know what is needed, so how can you expect us to be compliant, right? And which is where the unified control framework comes into play. As an organization or as a team, if we have a strategy, right, around unified control framework, this is where we are going, and this is the awareness and the education we need to give them. The engineers know what is needed from them, which brings me, to the point around giving your engineers the right tools to solve the challenges. And the tools here are not purely, a software or a solution. It can be a process, it can be documentation, it can be an Excel sheet for all we know, right? But as long as that culture change is started and it is communicated to them, I think that's one key starting point to solve these problems around GRC and compliance. Yeah, those are some initial high level thoughts, right? Probably, Andy, would love to hear how you're solving these challenges. I know we've been talking about the challenges and problems, but how do you see solving these problems in the long run?
Yeah, I think Rohan, to your point, certain decisions I think have to be made. I think, in my example, the pain point really, if you think about it, was the organization and culture. And I mean that in the sense that the organization and culture was still stuck in waterfall software development techniques. Now, why am I talking about waterfall when we have, moved well beyond that? Well, I think unless you have the culture and developers and a culture that says, hey, we really have got to mothball, our preconceived notions of developing software fundamentally, you really can't get to first base with Agile or any other reform, if you will, of how software is developed. And I can tell you from personal experience, it's very difficult to break institutionalized patterns of behavior, particularly in organizations that have a security department. So I think one of the most important things that organizations can do is re-examine the culture. Are we still having aspirations for a DevOps future, but we're paving the path with antiquated techniques in developing software? Because I think organizations can say very easily that we want to be DevOps or we are DevOps. But I'm very skeptical. I'm highly skeptical of any organization that actually announces that, yes, we have reached the point that we are a true DevOps environment. I believe the greater reality is that the culture is changing, and we're seeing really different development groups pushing for more of a DevOps-like culture, even though the existing culture is very ingrained in what I like to call antiquated software development habits, which still, unfortunately, happens to be waterfall. So I think culture has to change. It has to change dramatically, and it's going to be really pushed by innovative development thinkers and managers and senior managers who say, we really, really got to eradicate this institutionalized behavior before any change happens. I think the second most important thing that I found useful is, look at contemporary tools and the software that you're developing. Static code testing itself. Is that really in our rearview mirror? Do we really need that anymore? Do we need to skip a few steps and say, well, maybe dynamic testing is good, might be better than static testing, or make that leap of faith and take a look at more of what I see in the contemporary tools development, consideration of interactive application security testing. And again, this is really just to address the big R in the GRC world, where we're trying to figure out in real time what software is safe versus what software is dangerous, and to give it to developers in real time. So I think the second piece of it that I found to address some of the pain points that I found in this incredibly complex company, introduction of some new innovations like interactive application security testing. And that alone, really, what I would suggest is something that can definitely break through this glacier, if you will, and also to test the results of interactive application security testing with pen testing at large. Because I will bet you, if you do interactive application security testing, by the time you do a pen test, which most organizations have to do anyway, you're going to shortcut the process, because technically, if interactive application security testing is done correctly, the need for the pen testing results should be of a null value. And I think looking to the future, where we really want to compress time, we might need to look at what I like to call lazy ways of development. It's like, okay, we've sort of said we want to make software development fast, but how do we actually implement that? And I think there's some greater contemporary tools out there that are going beyond interactive application testing, and that's really preventing software risks at runtime. It's also known as runtime application security testing, or runtime application security prevention, called RASP. That's been more contemporary, and those tools will still need to vet themselves out this year and perhaps next year to bring the realization of creating basically sloppy software that is self-protecting, if you will. So I think those are the three things that I tried to do in my last topic in trying to speed up software development, but also include risk management at the same time. But again, it's always good to get other perspectives on this. Piyush, I mean, in terms of the pain points that you suffered, what were some of the things that you thought of as key enablers to deploy software quickly, but at the same time managing risk?
Absolutely, Andy, and thank you for that insight. I would echo a lot of the same pain points that Andy, you and Rohan, you've articulated here. One area that I want to touch upon is the governance within the GRC. As you've said, a lot of the times our development teams think they're DevOps, they're Agile, but they're really a shortened version of waterfall. And helping them understand that is very important. And that's where some lightweight governance touch has to come in with individual and collective responsibilities. Agile is nothing but breaking down silos. And without adding nomenclature or taxonomy, one of the key drivers that will essentially yield a better security mature product at the end would be to break down those silos. And they exist within security and in developer communities. How do you empower your development community to incorporate those GRC concepts as they're developing their code? One key area that we've seen where this has been helpful is building out security champions, where we embed developers. We empower those senior developers as security champions. We empower them. We give them responsibility of owning GRC components within their teams. They understand their teams. They understand their challenges at times better than security engineers do. And that level of empowerment has helped improve the overall collective responsibility, as well as adoption of GRC principles. One area that you brought up was the runtime application security aspect. The other side of that, in my mind, is also as we go more into the CI/CD based mode of operating, these CI/CD pipelines consume a lot of secrets and credentials. And that goes into compliance, it goes into risk, but that's also a major governance factor. Are you rotating your keys? Are you making sure your tokens are out of your GitHub accounts? How many breaches have occurred because people forgot to remove their credentials from their Git repos? Is that something that you can slap their hands on with compliance? But really, it's around governance, making sure that you have those key developer individuals whose prime responsibility is making sure their teams respectively leverage the right GRC tools and the mindset. That's been my experience. I know we are coming up on time. Rohan, any final words?
Sorry, I was just trying to get off mute. No, I think we've covered most of the points, Piyush. Especially the security champion is something key that personally we've been trying to implement, or I've been trying to implement across different organizations. Because as the security team, we don't have much insights into the development or the code base, from an SDLC perspective. The champions really help us navigate that gap and be our security champ. From a security perspective, they can talk our language. We have to obviously provide the training and the material. But that's one good point. And obviously the culture change is a key point, which both Andy and I were talking about. It has to come from the top. It has to come from our leadership, right, to fix these issues. And the more the leadership starts talking about it, the more it is ingrained in our engineers. And everyone has to start taking these regulations more seriously from a GRC perspective. I know it's probably not what the engineers like, but this is something we have to take more seriously. Even the S-form became a big thing with Log4j, right? It's not a compliance issue; it is more a technical issue. But if you knew what libraries you're using and what open source libraries you're using, this wouldn't have been an issue, and everyone wouldn't have been dealing with it on the last day. But listen, thanks. This was a good conversation, and good to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. Andy, any final words here for us, for the team?
I think the net effect of everything that we've talked about is that there are methods and ways where we need to consider implementing software quickly and managing that risk, providing good governance and ultimately compliance over software development. There are ways to do this. But as with all things, it does require tone at the top and organizations that really step up to the plate to test and take to the limits the capabilities that these more contemporary tools provide. Without that to and fro, unfortunately, development teams will be frustrated and they will be sort of stuck in time, if you will, into very old habits. So got to innovate, got to push the envelope. And I think if you do that, you're going to be implementing software really quickly without any of the GRC headaches that I've personally experienced in a lot of my previous roles in trying to develop software and to make it compliant.
Thank you, Andy and Rohan. I believe that was some great insights from your prior experiences and your current challenges we are facing. I feel GRC is a field that's only just coming out on its own. It still has room to grow and evolve. It's no longer a checkbox function, but it's evolving into a role which has real technological and environmental issues tied to it within the software development lifecycle.